they were going to be loaded with Russian oil and then leave the Black Sea. But before they got there, they were struck. And it's clear, and there's no question about it, that it was the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians actually released video footage of their drones striking at least one of the tankers. And then later, the announcement was made. They did it. So that is, very serious escalation. And we'll see what happens. It's very dangerous. The Russians can't let that continue. That could really harm them. You think about it. If like ships begin to fear that they can't actually even enter the Black Sea, that's going to make it more difficult for Russia to export oil. It'll do more harm than real sanctions would. So they can't let this simply continue. Now, they certainly can retaliate. They can just shut down shipping to Ukrainian ports like to Odessa. And that would, again, be very detrimental to the Ukrainians. They do receive a certain number of arms. They're not supposed to be shipped that way, but everybody knows that a certain amount of weapons do get shipped across the Black Sea to Ukraine. Occasionally, the Russians will strike those shipments when they're being offloaded at the port in Odessa. But beyond that, we're talking about economic war, and the Russians could respond in kind and say, okay, no more grain is going to leave Odessa, and in general just shut down a big part of the Ukrainian economy. That could be the response. I think, the Russians would be reluctant to do that, but if this continues, I think they almost would have to do that.
Why would Ukraine release footage of it and take credit for these strikes? Because you struck, civilian vessels that are not even owned by Russia. These aren't Russian tankers, and even if they were, they're civilian. So you've just opened. If you didn't announce it, you could try to give some plausible deniability and said, "Oh, Russia struck its own, struck these tankers to give it a justification as a false flag or whatever to do something." But now that they've done this, Russia will say can like you said, just be like, okay, well, if they're doing this, then we'll shut down Odessa's port. Ukraine, no more shipments into Ukraine.
Right. Well, I think part of it is, they actually want to announce to their supporters in the West, especially to the Europeans, look, we can hurt Russia. And they know that the Europeans really have no respect for international law. They've shown that. That international law has long gone out the window. They're just supporting Ukraine to the hilt. And this would be, I think another way of just saying, hey, we're still in this fight. We can hurt the Russians. And you have so many within Europe who are trying to shut down exports of Russian oil, through one means or another. And then the Ukrainians say, hey, yeah, look, we really can do it. We're doing it for you guys. Now, so I think like vis-a-vis the Europeans and probably the Americans too, it doesn't hurt them. It might actually help them. But vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and especially the Turks, it's got to hurt them. The Turks have to be very angry about this. Apparently, the Kazakhstan is actually quite upset about this because some of that oil that is loaded onto ships in the Russian port is actually from Kazakhstan. There's a pipeline that runs from Kazakhstan across Russia to that port. And so there's even a chance, I don't know if this was true in this case, that those ships were going to pick up Kazakh oil. In any case, there have been attacks, and there was one very recently on that pipeline and the facilities that are attached to that pipeline, the Kazakhstan pipeline. And so the Kazakhs are very, very angry about it.
Do you think this kind of gives a green light to the Russians who say, okay, well, we got to take Odessa to, make sure that Ukraine doesn't have the Black Sea coast?
Yeah, well, I think that's a further demonstration of like something we were talking about earlier, that they really need to take Odessa because it's a lot of the damage that Ukraine can do is actually through their access to the Black Sea. And if the Russians can deny them that access, they will have seriously weakened Ukraine. At least, they will have made it much more difficult for Ukraine to harm Russia.
Has Russia made any statement about this incident and about any steps that they might take, or are we still kind of just
I haven't
waiting?
seen anything about steps. They certainly have condemned it, but they haven't threatened any retaliation to my knowledge.
Do you think it's partly because there's, I don't know, some pretense of some type of negotiation? I mean, are they even involved, or are the Russians just kind of watching the Americans just scramble around with this plan? I mean, what's happening
Okay,
here? Is there anything
right.
actually going on?
Okay, well, we had that meeting in Geneva, where, according to the rumors, it went from a 28-point plan to a 19-point plan that was much more favorable to the Ukrainians. Now we have a meeting going on in Florida. It's not at Mar-a-Lago. It's actually, I think, it's Steve Witkoff's place. And I guess the most recent report was that, it's been constructive. We made progress, but it's clear that they haven't reached an agreement there, the Ukrainians and the Americans. Now, there are some American representatives that are supposed to appear in Russia, I believe, tomorrow to meet with Putin and Lavrov to actually present something to them there, and we'll see what happens. Again, it's just the whole thing is so chaotic, and and yeah, even the one like the most favorable versions of the plan, which probably don't exist anymore, were still unacceptable to the Russians. I don't see any chance that the Russians are going to accept anything. I think this is just just the amateur show of the American State Department right now.
Is Rubio getting more involved in this? Because prior, it used to seem like it was more Steve Witkoff was more the Secretary of State than Rubio was. Rubio was often just absent, and we knew that he's very hawkish. He's a classic neocon.
Right.
Is he being involved in this process? And if so, does he seem to also be willing to try to make it work?
I don't know. He was. You have to have your doubts about that. I think he's one of those people that is always pushing the neocon position. He can't do it too openly when Trump instructs him otherwise. But he was there leading the negotiating team in Geneva. I believe he was there also, or at least he gave a statement. I don't know if he was down in Florida, but he certainly gave a statement afterwards about it. And I think there's a chance that he may be going to Russia now. He has been involved in it, in varying degrees.
That seems to be a bit different than what we've seen.
Right.
Part of me is thinking this is what's going on, is that Trump is like, he really doesn't want this war in Ukraine. He's been using Witkoff the whole time. And now you need to use your Secretary of State at some point, right, to make anything kind of official. You need to have a real team to plan this out. So maybe he's telling Rubio, is like, look, Rubio, get this deal done somehow, and then you can have your war in Venezuela. I'll do it. Just settle this. We can't do both, right, buddy? So you get this, and then we'll go there,
That is, I think that's very much within the realm of possibility. I don't, I could.
Now Rubio seems more motivated than he's ever been.
Yeah, right. Hey, it could be. You might actually be right. I mean, really, I haven't heard that, but I like that.
Well, we'll see.
He's not going to get it for him, but he's got to at least make a show of making a big effort to get it done.
Right. Well, if that is the case, then maybe we won't have this war in Venezuela, because, like you said, Marco Rubio isn't going to get this deal, right? We've talked about this before. You still feel the same way.
Right.
This isn't going to happen. It's going to nothing. Russia can't trust anything that the U.S. presents itself, even if they do try to capitulate to all of Russia's demands. There's nothing that the West can do to guarantee that they'll actually be true to their word now. So I think, like you said, they're going to have to go on, take Odessa, connect to Transnistria, and just wait till there's a white flag waving, total capitulation from Ukraine.
Yeah, well, they may not even get that total capitulation. That Western Ukraine may just go on fighting. Unfortunately, I think that's what's going to happen. It would be good if they had that, and then Russia could actually carry out denazification or debanderization, and I think that could lead to real peace. But that's unfortunately, I don't think that will happen. I think that they will continue to fight. They will continue to receive support from the West to the very end. Not to the point where they can stop the advances of the Russians, but they can make it costly, especially when you get into Western Ukraine and where the local population really is quite hostile to Russia. At least it is now, So I think most likely it will end as a frozen conflict. The Russians will go to where they need to go to and then just stop. And then finally there will be that ceasefire. That's not the ideal outcome, but I think that's the most likely outcome.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to go over, Dad?
Um, I don't think we need to go over anything else today. We can get into, what's happening on the front lines maybe tomorrow, and we can go back to what's happening in the Middle East tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, but rather Wednesday. Right?
Wednesday. Okay,
right.
Sounds good. All right, then. We can end it there.
All right.
Okay, have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you
too.
soon, Dad.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.